Hello, this is Smart Bastard, and today I'd like to show the changes I've made over the last 2 weeks to do with my Monogame project. So, the first thing I added was the new water hexes. Before I only had one single type, and I thought it would make sense to have calmer water and then further away from shore to have more turbulent, more stormy water. I remember always playing games like Free Civ and Civilization 2 where there were certain ships that could only travel in the shallow water, not in the deep, and I felt like that mechanic might come in handy, even if it's just like certain events would only happen if you're quite far away from shore, or that you'd just generally be a bit safer sticking near the shore. After all, deep water is quite a different environment for travel. So I essentially had to make an algorithm for this, where each water hex, after they'd all been generated, we'd have to loop through them all again, and check that each water hex was a certain distance away from land. It's probably not the most efficient way of doing it. I probably could limit it to a narrower search, but each hex actually calculates all its neighbours, and then its neighbours' neighbours, and then its neighbours' neighbours, trying to find land. And when it hits land, it then returns the value of how far it's actually travelled to find that land. If that number's below 3, it stays a shallow water hex, and if it's 3 or above, it has a chance of being a deep water hex. So we end up with this quite nice effect where it's not perfect and it looks a bit random because of the random edges, but the main thing is that the middle of the water bodies are deep water and the edges are all shallow. After that, I refactored world generation and added some rather pretty coastal decorations in. These are effectively just beaches. So wherever there is an ocean hex that is next to a land hex, it will think that edge is a coast, and it will do that for all its neighbours, and then go, okay, I have these 3 a coast, and it works it out. But the long and short of it there is we now have some pretty beaches. I also completely refactored how the rendering was done, and this has actually improved the rendering time by, it's quadrupled it, the speed at which it's rendering. The next thing that I needed to add was rivers, which were more challenging than I thought. Initially, what I did was just create a bunch of random river spawn points across the map, as long as they weren't in water or in void hexes at the edge of the map, and then just run a river down a really rough height map I'd made, using the values gained from the mountains and hills. And then once it hit either a river, a water hex, or a void hex at the edge of the map, it would stop and be a completed river. And this kind of worked. You can clearly see some issues with it. The next thing I did was add river mouths to oceans and make sure that they get added on top of the coasts. But there are issues with rivers connecting in multiple places, sometimes a bit too extremely, really, and I actually thought they ended up looking like the roads you'd see in Civilization 2, which, was not the intended effect. So I had to fix this by, instead of storing each river as a simple yes, no, there is a river, there isn't a river, but instead storing its actual direction, so that a river could be side by side with another river without automatically looking like it's merged in. This gave us a much more, accurate way of deciding where a river is going, and it meant that a river would only join once in one place, as rivers do, which, works okay. There were a few other issues though, like rivers were spawning way too close to each other, so I had to add in a minimum spawn distance from each river. And then another thing that could happen in rare cases was where a river would loop back on itself, and it would go, okay, keeps going until it hits another river, it hits itself, and then just ends and thinks that's fine. So it would end up with a couple of circles, which was not intended behaviour. So I had to add in a check for that. But everything was finally coming together. But the one thing that I noticed was that rivers, generally speaking, weren't running well towards the oceans, towards the lakes, towards the water. And this is because back a couple of episodes ago in the devlog, I separated out the hex mountains and hills generation from the water generation. But doing that, yes, meant that mountains and hills could be closer to the water, but it meant they weren't sharing a height map value, which means the rivers weren't running smoothly because water wasn't always downhill of them, which isn't great. So to fix this, I had to unify the generation of the mountains, hills, and water and plains again, and I added some validation checks so we wouldn't get completely stuck if we couldn't generate a river. And altogether, these various checks have made it so that rivers run a lot more naturally from generally high up places towards the rivers, towards the map border, and look a lot more realistic. Now, they're not perfect, I have to say. You know, the main thing that's annoying me at the moment is that they're a bit too straight, which can be realistic. A lot of rivers are fairly straight, but I feel like I could improve the rivers a lot by adding a rainfall map where rivers are spawned only where there's enough water that would collect, accurately simulate basically where rain would fall, so that we don't get these clumps of rivers on one side of the map and not all over the map. And it would also mean if we wanted to add in arid areas like deserts, we would be able to adjust that so that rivers didn't spawn there, because at the moment they are random, which won't work if we wanted to build a desert. But 90% rule is 90% done. It will do for now, and we can revisit that later once we've dealt with some of the other mechanics. With that, we've got our new ocean hexes, our new coasts, we've improved the rendering, and we've added rivers. So I'd say that's fairly well done. So until next time, guys, ta-da!